Ma'am, what are you doing in this garage?
I live here, Unit 14B.
Sure you do. May I see your license and registration?
Special Agent Imani Williams, FBI, and you're trespassing on federal property the moment you block my car.
Nice costume. We hear this all the time. I need you to step out
The
for me.
last case put a cop in prison for assaulting a federal agent. Don't make me start a new one.
Officer David Miller had 18 months on the Atlanta Police Department, but his file already contained a troubling pattern that his superiors had chosen to ignore. He had amassed 7 complaints in less than a year and a half. Each one involved a woman of color being aggressively questioned in an environment where Miller decided they didn't belong. One sweltering afternoon in Buckhead, that pattern would ultimately cost the city $8,200,000 and detonate his career in a blaze of public disgrace. The woman in the car was Special Agent Imani Williams, a 16-year veteran of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. She lived in the upscale high-rise condominium Miller was patrolling. She had just returned from a departmental briefing. She was sitting in her legally parked Lexus, reviewing notes on her phone before heading up to her home. But Officer Miller saw a black woman in a high-end sedan in an affluent part of the city and concluded that something was amiss. Buckhead, Atlanta, a district synonymous with luxury retailers, sprawling mansions, and some of the most coveted real estate in the Southeast. It's the kind of place where Bentleys and Lexuses are as common as oaks, where condominium buildings boast concierge services and skyline view pools. It was 2:45 on a Friday afternoon in July. The temperature was a sticky 95 degrees, the kind of oppressive humidity that hangs in the air and makes the shade feel like a precious commodity. Special Agent Imani Williams had been with the FBI for 16 years. 16 years spent investigating domestic terrorism, counterintelligence threats, and complex financial crimes across the country. She had led undercover operations that dismantled extremist cells plotting attacks. She had coordinated with international intelligence agencies on espionage cases. She had testified in federal court 42 times. Her work had led to more than 250 felony convictions. Her conviction rate was one of the highest in the Atlanta field office. That afternoon, she had just finished a planning session at her office for an upcoming counterterrorism drill. She was wearing a business casual dress, her hair styled professionally. She had driven back to her building in her black Lexus LS, a car she had purchased after a significant promotion 2 years prior. She had parked in her assigned spot in the secure resident garage. She was sitting with the engine off, using the car's retained accessory power to stay cool, while she reviewed notes from the meeting on her encrypted work phone before going upstairs. It was a mundane, perfectly legal moment. A federal agent wrapping up her workday. Imani was 42 years old. She had grown up in College Park, the daughter of a high school principal and a librarian. She put herself through Spelman College, graduating summa cum laude with a dual degree in political science and sociology. She had been recruited by the FBI directly from a graduate program at Georgetown and was accepted after a grueling series of interviews, a comprehensive background check, and intense psychological screening. She spent 20 weeks at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia. She excelled in all areas, particularly in strategic analysis and crisis management.
Her career was a testament to her brilliance and relentless drive. She had earned every promotion, every commendation, every high-stakes assignment. She owned her condominium, a goal she'd achieved through years of disciplined saving and smart investments. She drove a car she had earned. She had built a life that was a source of immense pride for her family, a life that demonstrated that excellence could be achieved through intellect and unwavering dedication to public service. But to Officer David Miller, none of that was relevant. All he saw was a black woman in a car that he didn't think she should be driving, in a building he didn't think she could afford. Officer David Miller had been with the Atlanta PD for just 18 months. His performance at the academy had been mediocre. He struggled with exercises focused on de-escalation and cultural sensitivity. His instructors noted a tendency to resort to aggression quickly and to perceive non-threatening situations as hostile. His psychological evaluation had raised red flags, with the examiner noting concerns about implicit bias and an authoritarian personality. The recommendation was for him to be hired, but placed under strict supervision. That strict supervision never happened. Miller was assigned to a patrol zone that included Buckhead, one of the wealthiest districts in the city. His field training officer, eager to get back to his own patrol, signed off on Miller after the minimum required time, noting that Miller was eager but required ongoing mentorship. The mentorship was never implemented. Miller was cut loose on solo patrol, and the complaints began almost immediately. The first complaint was filed 4 months into his solo career. Miller had detained a Hispanic woman packing groceries into her Range Rover at a local market. He demanded to see her license and registration, insisting the vehicle might be stolen. It was her car. She had the title in her name. She filed a formal complaint. The Office of Professional Standards reviewed it. Miller claimed the vehicle's tag was partially obscured. The complaint was dismissed, with a note for supervisory counseling. The second complaint came from an Asian American woman taking photos of the skyline from a public park. Miller stopped her, questioned her for 20 minutes, and accused her of conducting surveillance. She was an architect, working on a project. She filed a complaint. OPS reviewed it. Miller claimed she was acting suspiciously. The complaint was closed, and he was required to take an online refresher course on situational awareness. The pattern was clear. A black woman waiting in her car to pick up her daughter from a private ballet class. Miller accused her of casing the neighborhood. Another complaint. An Indian woman sitting on a park bench reading a book. Miller questioned her for not having ID. Another complaint. A Middle Eastern woman meeting a friend for coffee at a cafe. Miller detained her, claiming her backpack looked suspicious. Another complaint. 7 complaints in 18 months, 7 women of color, 7 instances where Miller presumed guilt based on his own biases about race and class, and 7 times the department's internal review process closed the cases with nothing more than a wrist slap, counseling, online courses, or verbal warnings, no meaningful consequences. Miller remained on patrol. His supervisors were aware of the pattern. They talked about it in hushed tones, but no one took action to remove him from the street. No one mandated a psychological reevaluation or intensive in-person retraining. They just kept closing out the complaint files and hoping the problem would fix itself. It didn't. That Friday afternoon, Miller was cruising through Buckhead on routine patrol. He had written a few parking tickets and responded to a false alarm at a retail store. Now he was driving through the multi-level parking garage of a luxury condominium, looking for anything out of place. He drove past the second level and saw Imani Williams sitting in her Lexus, a black woman in a luxury car in a building where units sold for over $1 million. Miller's mind didn't register resident decompressing after work. It jumped straight to car thief, trespasser, someone who was where she wasn't supposed to be and needed to be confronted. He swung his patrol car around and parked directly behind her Lexus, trapping her in the space. He switched on his flashing blue lights, their silent, strobing glare reflecting off the concrete walls of the garage, turning the mundane setting into a scene of sudden, unwarranted drama. Inside her Lexus, Special Agent Imani Williams watched in her rearview mirror. She wasn't alarmed, not yet. She was trained to observe, to analyze, to remain calm in situations far more dangerous than this. She had faced down armed terrorists and interrogated spies. A local cop blocking her in was an annoyance, not a threat. She took a slow, deliberate breath, her mind already cycling through protocols and possibilities. She assumed it was a mistake, a misunderstanding that would be cleared up in a moment. Officer Miller got out of his patrol car with a deliberate, heavy swagger. He left his driver's side door open. His hand was resting on the butt of his Glock, a gesture meant to convey authority and intimidation. He approached her driver's side window, his expression a mask of stern suspicion. Imani powered down her window. The humid garage air, thick with the smell of concrete and exhaust, rolled in. "Can I help you, officer?" she asked, her tone even and professional. Miller bypassed the pleasantry. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. His eyes scanned the interior of her car, lingering on the leather seats and the high-end dashboard. "I live here," Imani replied simply. "I'm just reviewing some notes before I head upstairs." Miller let out a short, incredulous scoff. "You live here?" he repeated, not as a question but as a statement of disbelief. "I'm going to need to see your license and the registration for this vehicle." Imani's internal assessment of the situation shifted. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a confrontation. Her training kicked in. Maintain composure, comply with lawful orders, but also assert your rights. "Officer, I'm legally parked in my assigned residential spot. I haven't committed any traffic violation. For what reason are you detaining me and demanding my identification?" The question seemed to infuriate Miller. His jaw tightened. To him, a civilian, especially this civilian, had no right to question his authority. "Your window tint looks too dark. State law is very clear on that. Now, license and registration. Don't make me ask you again." Imani knew her window tint was factory installed and fully compliant with Georgia law. She had been through this before, but never with this level of immediate hostility. She reached into her purse, retrieved her wallet, and produced her driver's license. She handed it to him.
"The registration is in the glove box," she said. "Am I free to get it?" "Stay right where you are with your hands on the steering wheel," Miller commanded, his voice rising. "I'll tell you when you can move." He took her license and walked back to his patrol car without a word. He sat in his driver's seat, the door still open, and began running her name through the system. From her car, Imani could see him talking on his radio, his head shaking as if in confirmation of some unseen suspicion. Minutes stretched into an eternity in the silent garage. The blue lights continued their silent, rhythmic flashing. Imani kept her hands on the wheel as instructed. She watched him. She noted his posture, his agitated movements, the way he kept glancing back at her with a look of undisguised contempt. He was a powder keg, and she was doing everything in her power not to light the fuse. Her training had taught her how to read people, and what she read in Officer David Miller was dangerous instability. After nearly 10 minutes, Miller got out of his car again and strode back to her window. He held her license in his hand, tapping it against his palm. "Imani Williams," he said, mispronouncing her first name. "The system says you're clean, but that doesn't explain what you're doing in this garage, in this car." "I told you I live here," she repeated, her patience wearing thin. "My address is on that license you're holding. It matches the address of this building. My condominium is Unit 14B. "Anybody can get a fake ID," Miller sneered, "and this car isn't registered to you." This was a blatant lie. The car was registered in her name, a fact he would have seen on the same screen that showed her driver's license status. He was no longer just bending the rules, he was breaking them. He was creating a false narrative to justify his illegal detention, and he was escalating. "Officer, that is incorrect," Imani said, her voice dropping into a lower, more serious register. "That vehicle is registered to me. I have the documentation in the glove compartment, which I will retrieve if you allow me to. You are currently conducting an unlawful stop and detention. I am a federal agent and I know my rights." It was a calculated risk. She had hoped to de-escalate, but Miller was leaving her no choice. Announcing her status might make him back off. It had the opposite effect.
Miller's eyes narrowed. A slow, condescending smirk crossed his lips, as if her statement confirmed every assumption he'd already made. "A federal agent," he repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Right, and I'm the mayor of Atlanta." He leaned in further, his breath fogging the edge of her open window.
You really think you can throw that around to get out of trouble? If you were really an FBI agent, you'd know better than to sit here looking suspicious in a garage full of million-dollar condos. Imani didn't flinch. She kept her hands on the wheel, her posture controlled, her expression unreadable, but her mind was working fast. She recognized the pattern immediately. This wasn't about procedure. This was about perception. He didn't believe a black woman could belong here, not in this building, not in that car, and certainly not with a badge. She took a breath, her voice calm but edged with steel. "Officer Miller, if you don't believe me, I can retrieve my credentials from my purse. They're right beside me. My FBI shield, my credentials, my government-issued ID, all verifiable, all real." "No sudden moves," he warned, stepping back half a pace but keeping his hand near his sidearm. "And don't even think about touching your phone." But Imani had already made her decision. She reached slowly for her purse, not to grab anything, just to signal intent. "I'm going to retrieve my credentials," she said clearly, enunciating every word. "I'm telling you before I move. I'm not reaching for a weapon. I'm not hiding anything. I'm a federal law enforcement officer, and you are currently violating my constitutional rights." Just then, a second car rolled into the garage level, a silver Audi driven by a middle-aged man in a tailored suit. He slowed as he saw the patrol car's lights. Recognizing Imani, he pulled into a nearby spot and stepped out. "Imani?" he called, frowning. "Everything okay?" It was Dr. Ellis Carter, a cardiothoracic surgeon and Imani's neighbor on the 14th floor. They'd served together on the building security committee. Miller turned sharply. "Sir, this is a police matter. Please return to your vehicle." Dr. Carter didn't move. "That's Imani Williams. She lives in 14B. She's an FBI agent. I've seen her credentials myself, and you're blocking her in her own assigned parking space." Miller ignored him, turning back to Imani with renewed irritation. "Enough stalling. Step out of the vehicle."
"I will not," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm parked legally. I've committed no crime. You have no probable cause, no reasonable suspicion, and no legal basis to remove me from this car." Miller's face flushed red. His hand twitched toward his taser. "You're under arrest for obstruction and failure to comply," he growled. At that moment, Imani made her move, not physically, but strategically. She reached into her purse with deliberate slowness and pulled out her FBI credentials. She held them up through the open window, shield and ID clearly visible. "Special Agent Imani Williams, FBI Atlanta Field Office," she announced, her voice ringing with finality. 16 years of federal service, badge number GA7492. I am not under arrest. I am not obstructing. I am asserting my rights as a citizen and a federal officer, and if you lay a hand on me without legal cause, you will be charged with assault on a federal agent. Miller barely glanced at the credentials. "Could be fake," he muttered. Dr. Carter stepped closer, pulling out his own phone. "I'm recording this," he said, "and I'm calling building security. They know Imani. They'll confirm everything." Just then, a woman in workout clothes emerged from the stairwell, Miss Lillian Cho, a federal prosecutor who lived on the 12th floor. She took in the scene instantly. "Imani?" she asked, then turned to Miller, her voice sharp. "Officer, do you have any idea who you're detaining?" Miller spun around, flustered. "Ma'am, I need you to—" "I'm an assistant U.S. attorney, and that's Special Agent Williams, one of the most respected counterterrorism agents in this district. You're about to make the worst mistake of your career." Miller's confidence wavered. He looked from Lillian to Dr. Carter to Imani, his mind racing. But instead of backing down, his pride doubled down. "Stay out of this, all of you." Then, without warning, he yanked open Imani's car door. The hinges groaned in the concrete silence of the garage. Imani didn't scream, she didn't lunge, she simply locked eyes with him and said, voice low and lethal, "You just assaulted a federal officer, on camera, in front of 2 witnesses. I hope your pension's worth it." Her fingers moved to her phone, which she'd kept hidden in her lap. With one tap, she activated her emergency protocol, an encrypted direct line to her special agent in charge. "SAC Mitchell?" a voice answered instantly.
It's Imani. I'm being unlawfully detained by an Atlanta PD officer in my residential garage. He just force opened my vehicle door after I presented credentials. I have 2 federal employee witnesses on scene. I am recording. I need immediate backup and a call to APD command. Mitchell's voice hardened. Stay in the car. Do not engage further. I'm dispatching 2 agents and activating our liaison with Atlanta PD. Do not let him touch you again. Miller, overhearing, went pale. His bravado evaporated in an instant. He stepped back, his hand dropping from his belt. But it was too late. From the ramp, the wail of approaching sirens cut through the thick garage air. First a single APD cruiser, then a second, then the deep, authoritative rumble of an FBI fleet vehicle. 2 uniformed Atlanta PD sergeants stepped out of the first cruiser. One of them, Sergeant Denise Owens, a veteran with 22 years on the force and a known advocate for internal accountability, immediately recognized the scene for what it was. She took in the open door, the witnesses, the still flashing lights, and Imani seated calmly but radiating quiet fury. "Officer Miller," she barked, "step away from the vehicle, now."
Miller stammered. "Sarge, this subject was acting suspicious." "That's Special Agent Williams," Owens interrupted, her voice ice-cold. "She lives here. She's FBI, and you just assaulted her in her own home." She turned to Imani, her expression shifting to one of professional respect and deep apology. "Agent Williams, I am so sorry this happened," she said, stepping forward. "May I see your credentials, please?" Imani handed them over. Owens examined them thoroughly, then glanced at the garage signage, the assigned parking decal on Imani's windshield, and the building directory visible through the elevator lobby. She turned back to Miller. Her voice was low, but carried the weight of final judgment. "You've had 7 complaints in 18 months, all women of color, all in situations where you assumed criminality based on nothing but your own bias." She paused, her eyes burning into his. "And today, you crossed the line from profiling into federal felony territory. Give me your badge and your weapon." Miller stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, his body trembling. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He just slowly unclipped his badge and handed over his service weapon, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped them. An FBI SUV pulled in behind the APD cruisers. SAC Robert Mitchell stepped out, flanked by 2 tactical agents. His presence alone shifted the gravity of the room. He walked straight to Imani's car. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "Physically, yes. Professionally, I'm outraged. Institutionally, I'm done being polite about this." Mitchell nodded. "You won't have to be." He turned to Sergeant Owens. "We're filing federal charges for assault on a federal officer, unlawful detention, and civil rights violations, and we're demanding a full internal investigation into how an officer with 7 substantiated bias complaints was still on patrol." Owens didn't hesitate. "You'll get it, and you'll get my full cooperation." Imani finally stepped out of her Lexus. She stood tall, her credentials still in hand, and faced Miller one last time. "Officer Miller," she said, her voice clear and deliberate, "I've spent 16 years protecting this country from terrorists, spies, and people who want to tear our democracy apart. And today, the greatest threat I faced was you. Not because you're strong, but because your department let you believe your bias was a valid reason to harass citizens." Miller couldn't meet her eyes. He stared at the concrete floor, his career dissolving in real time. Around them, the garage, once silent except for the hum of ventilation, was now filled with voices. Building security arriving, APD command on the radio, FBI agents securing the perimeter, witnesses giving statements. The video Dr. Carter and Miss Cho recorded was already being forwarded to news outlets. By sundown, the story would be everywhere. But in that moment, standing in the dim fluorescent light of her own garage, Imani Williams knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about her. It was about every woman of color who'd been told she didn't belong, every professional,
every homeowner, every citizen who'd been treated like a suspect simply for existing in a space someone decided wasn't for her. And she was done letting that go unanswered.
The fallout from that sweltering July afternoon in Buckhead rippled far beyond the garage walls. Within hours, the videos, Dr. Carter's, Miss Cho's, and the building's own security footage were circulating on social media, local news channels, and eventually national platforms. By nightfall, the hashtags Belong Here and Imani Williams were trending. News outlets ran split-screen comparisons, Imani's FBI commendations beside Officer Miller's complaint history, her Spelman diploma beside his barely passed academy scores. The contrast wasn't just stark, it was damning. The Atlanta Police Department scrambled. A press release was issued before midnight, placing Miller on immediate administrative leave pending a full internal investigation. But the public wasn't satisfied. Not after 7 prior complaints had been ignored. Not after a decorated federal agent had been treated like a trespasser in her own home. By morning, the FBI Atlanta field office released its own statement. Special Agent Imani Williams is a highly respected and accomplished federal law enforcement professional whose work has directly protected our national security. The conduct exhibited by Officer David Miller, unlawful detention, refusal to verify credentials, and physical interference with a federal agent constitutes a serious violation of civil rights and federal law. The FBI will fully support Agent Williams in all legal and disciplinary actions arising from this incident. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Georgia opened a civil rights investigation. The Department of Justice launched a parallel probe into APD's handling of bias complaints, a move that sent tremors through City Hall. But the most immediate reckoning came in the form of a lawsuit. Filed just 11 days after the incident, the civil complaint named not only Officer David Miller, but also his field training officer, the sergeant who'd signed off on his solo patrol despite red flags, the commander of the Buckhead precinct, and the city of Atlanta itself. The legal claims were exhaustive: unlawful seizure under the Fourth Amendment, racial discrimination in violation of the Equal Protection Clause, assault and battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, failure to supervise, train, and discipline officers with documented bias, deliberate indifference to a known pattern of unconstitutional conduct. What made the case unassailable wasn't just Imani's status, it was the paper trail. 7 complaints, psychological warnings, supervisor logs acknowledging concerning trends, training records showing Miller skipped mandatory de-escalation modules, emails where a lieutenant dismissed a colleague's suggestion to reassign him. He's just adjusting, give him time. Time was precisely what the department had given him and what Imani would never get back. The city's legal team knew they were cornered. A jury would hear that a 16-year FBI veteran, a woman who dismantled terrorist cells, was forced to prove she belonged in her own garage. They'd see Miller's face when he scoffed at her credentials. They'd hear his voice inventing a window tint violation that didn't exist. And they'd learn that this wasn't his first time. It was his 8th. Behind closed doors, settlement talks began, before the city even filed a formal response.
Meanwhile, Imani returned to work, but not as before. She still led investigations, still coordinated with Interpol and DHS, but something had shifted. She now double-checked her parking decal. She kept her FBI badge clipped visibly to her belt even off duty. She rehearsed how she'd introduce herself if stopped again. Special Agent Imani Williams, FBI, as if naming herself might shield her from disbelief. She didn't want to live that way, but Miller had taught her a brutal truth. Excellence alone wasn't armor. Public pressure mounted. Community groups organized rallies outside APD headquarters.
Former complaint filers, women whose cases had been quietly closed, came forward with their stories. One by one, they stood at microphones, recounting how Miller had humiliated them, detained them, questioned their right to exist in spaces they owned, rented, or simply visited. Their voices gave Imani's ordeal context. It wasn't an anomaly. It was a pattern, and the system had enabled it. Sergeant Denise Owens, who'd taken Miller's badge that day, became an unexpected ally. She testified before the Atlanta City Council, condemning the department's inaction. "We had every warning sign," she said, voice steady but laced with sorrow. "We ignored them until the victim had a federal shield. That's not justice. That's privilege." Her words went viral. 13 months after the incident, the city of Atlanta agreed to a settlement, $8,200,000, the largest civil rights payout in Georgia history for racial profiling by law enforcement. The funds came from city reserves, meaning Atlanta taxpayers footed the bill for a failure of leadership, oversight, and moral courage. Miller was officially terminated. His name was added to the National Decertification Index, barring him from law enforcement in any state. Federal prosecutors charged him with assault on a federal officer and deprivation of rights under color of law. Facing overwhelming evidence, he pleaded guilty. He received 2 years of probation, 300 hours of community service at a civil rights education center, and a permanent felony record. He issued a public apology. "I allowed my assumptions to override my duty. I failed Imani Williams, the citizens of Atlanta, and the badge I wore. I am deeply sorry." Imani read the statement once, then deleted it without comment. But she didn't disappear. Instead, she took a stand. With a portion of her settlement, she founded the Belong Initiative, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting women of color in federal law enforcement. The program offered mentorship, legal advocacy, psychological support, and public education on implicit bias in policing. Its first campaign, "Credentials Don't Lie, Bias Does." She also testified before Congress during hearings on police reform, her voice calm but unyielding. "I didn't ask to become a symbol. I asked to sit in my car in peace. The fact that I had to prove my right to exist in my own home, despite 16 years of service to this country, tells you everything you need to know about how bias distorts justice. The 7 women before me didn't have a federal shield. They just had their truth, and their truth was dismissed. Don't wait for the next federal agent to be targeted before you take bias complaints seriously. By then, it's too late." In the Buckhead condominium, a new policy was implemented. All security personnel and visiting officers were required to verify residency through building logs before initiating any enforcement action. Imani's parking spot, space 14B, was quietly fitted with a small plaque, "A place where she belongs." Officer David Miller never worked in law enforcement again. He moved out of Georgia. His name faded from headlines, but not from records. And Imani Williams? She still drives her black Lexus. She still lives in 14B. But now, when she parks in her spot on a hot Atlanta afternoon, she doesn't just sit there reviewing notes. Sometimes she smiles, because no one has ever questioned her right to be there again.